use to listen to your comments, and you can pop questions in there, and you can also pop questions in the Q&A box. If you can't use the chat box and would like to ask a verbal question, that's fine. Just raise your hand, and I will do better this time at unmuting you later, and then you can talk to Gail and Jane directly. And the last thing about the chat box is make sure that your box is turned to all panelists and attendees, and then everybody will see your comments. Sometimes if it's turned to just panelists, it just means that we get to see them, and there's far too many comments, which are incredible to not be shared with everybody. Right, so welcome, Gail. So I think most people will know you, Gail, because you are highly influential in our community. So I'm going to introduce Gail, who has worked in the public sector since the late 1980s, which I don't think can be right.
So kind.
No, I just don't believe that. She became a citizen advocate in the mid-90s, and then she spent 10 years delivering advocacy services across London. So she really does know her advocacy onions. And she's been at NDTI since 2015, leading on the quality performance mark. So yeah, welcome, Gail.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you.
And
good to be here.
Yeah, isn't it? And welcome, Jane, who is a qualified social worker. Hi, Jane.
Hi there.
So Jane qualified in 1983, again, I don't believe that, far too long ago. And then she managed advocacy projects. So she has fabulous insight into advocacy, and then has spent most of her time working in safeguarding adults. She was recently employed with the local government association, the LGA, and she researched the report that her and Gail are going to talk to you about today. So shall I hand over? Gail, you should be able to show your screen now. And I'll turn my camera off. We may have a break halfway through. Deborah, you're going to lead and tell us if that's a thing. Yeah. Okay, so over to you, Gail and Jane.
Great.
Hi.
So I think that's us screen sharing, if all is as planned. Yep. So Kate, thanks for that lovely introduction. And it's really lovely to be here after such an amazing week of conference and Advocacy Awareness Week. So yeah, looking forward to this session and the afternoon. So Jane and I are going to tag team a little bit through this session, and as it's Friday lunchtime, we've got a few little interactive moments throughout the session. And here is the moment where we see if I can access the poll. So we thought we would see who's here. And Kate, I don't think I can.
Leave it with me. I will do question 1.
No. Ta-da. Question 1. So we'd love you to let us know who you are. Give you a minute or two. Kate, how's it going? Oh, it's weird not being able to see people answer.
So we've got 110 votes of 150. So I'll give 10 more seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ta-da!
Right, and we're going to end that poll and share results.
Wow, so loads and loads of advocates in the room. That's fantastic. Great. And some family members, a family member. And a few of you who are none of the above, but still very important. Well, welcome everybody. And we shall move on. I'm going to hand over to Jane to carry on introducing herself and to start taking us through.
Thank you, Gail. And I'm going to leave Gail totally in charge of changing the slides because IT makes me really anxious. So thank you, Gail. and Kate. So Kate's told you a bit about my work background, but I think it's really important as well to say a bit about who I am, because actually when we work together, it's really important to understand where we come from, where each of us come from. So I just wanted to say that, like all of you, I am a person as well as a professional. And you know, I'm a mum, I've got a partner, I'm a daughter, and all of those experiences that I have in those roles, really, I bring all of those here to this work. So experiences of family members in care settings, in hospital inpatient settings, experiences as a volunteer on a long stay mental health ward, and so on. And I'm sure all of you bring those here as well today. And that's really, really important, because in some ways that makes it very much a heart thing as well as a head thing that we're talking about today. So just a little bit about background and context. So Gail and I worked together on this briefing, strengthening the role of advocacy in making safeguarding personal. And we'll leave you with the link to that briefing at the end of these slides. So I'm going to skim through the backgrounds and aims of this briefing in a minute. But first, I just want to underline the importance of us working in partnership on these key messages. So as we share the core messages from the briefing, we want you to think about, out of those core messages, which are the ones that really resonate for you. Think about what you can do, but also think about who you can talk to about those core messages in order to effect change, because it's all of us together that's going to make a difference here. And just to share a little anecdote, when I was working in the role of advocacy coordinator, I came to the role from one where I'd been working on safeguarding and adults with a county council. And at first I was viewed really quite suspiciously by my colleagues in the advocacy sector, my new colleagues in the advocacy sector, who actually referred to me as gamekeeper turned poacher. And as Gail and I spoke with some of you earlier this year, one thing really stood out for me amongst others, and that is that working together, a mutual understanding of roles and responsibilities is absolutely key to success here. It's important for us to move away at times from that us and them position to one where we engage with each other to have the difficult conversations, and they are really difficult. Negotiate, win others over, as well as developing the way that we ourselves are working. So I hope that through the briefing and during this hour, we can encourage all of you to think about who you can connect with to get some of its core messages out there and help develop effective safeguarding practice. It's all of our responsibility to do that. Now, the other message about partnership and sharing that came through really clearly in the conversations that Gail and I had is an appetite amongst advocates to share ideas across regions, across the whole country. So this conference is really important, and those conversations really need to carry on after this. So moving on to the next slide. Why did this piece of work come about? Well, it came about because we know how significant advocacy is in making safeguarding both personal and effective. The connections between principles of advocacy and of making safeguarding personal were set out in an earlier briefing at the end of December 2017. And Making Safeguarding Personal is often known as MSP, not ESP. And we know that to tap into the potential, there's need to be a greater acknowledgement of what advocacy is, the rights and responsibilities associated with it, and what can help make its contribution to adult safeguarding as effective as it possibly can be. So in the next slide, I'm going to have a further look at the background to this work. So I'll let you read through that about how the work was funded and how Gail and I got together to work on this. The safeguarding focus in the Care and Health Improvement Programme, which is based at the LGA, has very much emphasised making safeguarding personal. And for anyone who isn't familiar with making safeguarding personal, it has been part of their work since 2012. There's a wealth of literature on it on the LGA website. All you've got to do is Google Making Safeguarding Personal LGA and you'll find tons of stuff on Making Safeguarding Personal. Then, as a result of the work on that programme in 2013 and 14, when 52 local authority areas volunteered to pilot Making Safeguarding Personal as an approach, it then followed in the Care and Support Statutory Guidance. It features in there. And that guidance talks about making safeguarding personal being person-led and outcome-focused, engaging with the person about how best to respond to their safeguarding situation, enhancing involvement, choice and control, and improving quality of life and well-being as well as safety. So the connection with advocacy principles is really clear, I hope. It's very much a human rights-based approach where we get to the bottom of what's really important to people and communities, and we actively reach out to them. We don't just expect them to come to us. And I think we know we can't do that, having just listened to those of us who did to Jackie's presentation earlier. It's about supporting and empowering people, engaging with them to resolve their own circumstances, and people being offered informed choice. So it's a tall order. It's not simply a question of changing individual practice, but also the context in which that practice takes place and can flourish. It involves culture and organisational change. And advocacy is so very important in all of that. So moving on to who this briefing is for, it's for everyone. It's for everyone to get behind this to make sure that change happens. The time is really ripe for this now. There are a number of things that have come out, and I'll refer to one or two of those across this hour, that really show how important advocacy is, but how its potential is not being exploited. So let's move on to the next slide. And there is a wide range of stakeholders here, and this is what together we are aiming to do. All the way through this afternoon, we need to think, what can you do to take this forward? We want to generate conversations about these issues that are raised in the briefing and action planning to move forward. We don't just want to talk about it. That includes thinking about who we need to influence and how we're going to do that. We know there's work to be done. Evidence, for example, in a very recent large-scale review of Safeguarding Adults reviews. It is soon to be published on that LGA Making Safeguarding Personal website. Safeguarding adults reviews, for those who aren't familiar with them, are usually carried out where someone has died and there are significant multi-agency lessons to be learned. That review of 231 reviews across 2017 to 19 includes, for example, the quote, "The absence of advocacy was notable in a range of circumstances where an advocate could have made a significant contribution." There are also references to commissioning of advocacy. We can use this kind of evidence to support taking action, but also to support encouraging others who we are in contact with to take action. So on the next slide, where did the messages in this briefing come from? Well, crucially, this briefing came out of conversations with advocacy providers about what's happening in respect of safeguarding adults and what needs to happen and what they think works. A list of organisations that we had conversations with is at the back of the briefing. And I'd just like to say how really grateful Gail and I were to people who took part in these conversations, because half of them were just as the COVID-19 pandemic really bit. And so, you know, you had a lot to think about. So thank you for prioritising this. So the next slides are all about the core messages in the briefing. Those core messages are presented in 5 clusters, and we're going to look at those 5 clusters now. And we want to take you through them, but also try to establish from you how far these resonate with your experience, because we've got a great opportunity here of a much wider group of advocates and others here. If they do resonate with you, we want to stimulate activity and work on the messages across sectors. So on now to the first 4 messages that are in the briefing. The first is about the need for clear understanding across organisations of the independent advocacy role in making safeguarding personal. And then the need for that role to be considered right at the start of safeguarding involvement, not, as we heard is common, as a last resort. Then the extent to which advocacy is considered and requested of you, advocacy providers, where a Section 42 statutory safeguarding adults inquiry is triggered. The extent to which that is true really needs to be understood, investigated, and where necessary, addressed. And then finally, in this cluster of messages, the need to complete a mental capacity assessment prior to referring for advocacy. Indications from this piece of work are that there is still insufficient emphasis on this. So on to the next slide, and taking a look at what advocates said to us about this cluster of messages. Some key points are here, and I'll give you time to have a look at those. Advocacy is not thought about much in safeguarding. You know, we just looked at how close the principles of advocacy and safeguarding are, and yet it's not looked at very much. We need to do something about that. And then underlining both advocacy and MSP principles, one advocate said the idea of the CARE Act is that the person is part of the entire process and their outcomes are looked at with them at the very beginning, and we follow that through to the end. They said that rarely happens. So let's look to the next slide about what advocates said might help in addressing these issues. Gail, could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So in the conversation we had with advocates, they told us about successful approaches to tackle these issues, and they discussed ideas with us about what would help with the issues raised, including these set out here. So they talked about actively engaging in the Safeguarding Adults Board and its subgroups locally, regular awareness raising with health and social care teams, working with safeguarding boards to review the data they collect, with a focus on looking at the number of referrals to advocacy, cross-attendance at team meetings to raise awareness of common issues and address them together. But we know too from those conversations that there often is not any or sufficient resource allocated to advocacy providers to engage in those conversations and to build relationships. We highlight this issue later in the messages in the briefing, so just hold on to that, please. So Gail, I'm going to hand over to you for another poll.
Yep, so we've already had some comments in the chat box about this, Jane, but Kate,
Good.
Brilliant. Look, she didn't even need a cue. So we really wanted to hear from you, from your perspective, about whether you think the role of advocacy is adequately understood. So the question is, do you think the role of advocacy needs to be better understood? So we'll give you a minute or two. I don't know that we're going to need that long on this one.
I don't think we will.
Yeah, definitely is my answer to that.
How are we doing, Kate?
I will end in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah. And that's really echoes what we've heard from advocates, both within the conversations we had for this briefing, but in all the conversations that we've been having throughout the pandemic. We just keep hearing this message that advocacy needs to be better understood in order for people to be able to access that support appropriately. Okay, Jane, shall I move us on?
Yes, please. It's great to have these polls because when Gail and I go on to talk to other people, we can say that amongst a much bigger group of advocates, this was a strong feeling too. So that's really helpful. Thank you. So then the next two core messages are again about understanding, but this time about the need for transparency and clarity about what is a safeguarding concern and the basis for decisions made by local authorities when a concern is referred to them. Referrers and the local authority need a common language and understanding of terms. And really importantly, from our conversations, adult social care teams need to give feedback to advocates who make referrals of safeguarding concerns, feedback about decisions made. And really importantly, what we were told is that where an issue is not pursued through safeguarding, but there is a need for assurance that identified risks to well-being and safety are addressed, you, the referrer, need to know that. It's very important. So let's have a look at a few of the things that advocates said to us in these conversations. They were around the lack of consistency in understanding and responding to safeguarding concerns. The need for clear guidance on when an issue is a safeguarding concern and what you do if it isn't, but nevertheless someone's at risk. Concerns that risks might remain in situations and where there isn't feedback, then you don't know whether or not the risks that you raised are being addressed. So let's move on to the next slide in terms of what people said helps with this. Again, relationships and conversations feature large here, but also clarity and a shared language is needed. We hope that the latter might be supported by a recently published framework to help across all agencies to develop a shared understanding of terms and then working together with the person for positive outcomes. If you're interested in knowing about that, then we've put the link on this slide, and I know that Kate will share the slides. If you contact Gail afterwards, then Gail can send you the details of an upcoming recorded webinar on the framework about understanding safeguarding concerns, along with an opportunity to join one of 8 Q&A sessions that the LGA will be running. So I really hope that the advocacy sector will be represented in those Q&A sessions. I no longer work for the LGA, but I would really love it if you were part of it. Some more specific things that advocates told us they are doing to support understanding and practice here are set out in the briefing. Please do dip into that briefing to find out what others are doing and to learn from each other. So over to Gail again for another question.
So again, Jane, I think people have preempted our next question. So thank you, Kate. So this time what we'd like to hear from you is about whether or not, when you've raised a safeguarding concern, do you get feedback from the local authority, from the social worker, from the social care practitioner about what's happened or is happening with that concern? And Jane, in the chat, people are saying they don't get feedback and they're needing to chase. And again, that we heard that very strongly during the conversations we had.
Exactly, yeah.
No feedback, chase, chase, chase is what people are saying.
I can see it in the chat coming up. Yeah, okay, so.
Okay, 5 seconds to close. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so actually it's a broader split than we might have guessed at from the chat. So 5%, 6 of you are saying yes, you always get feedback. We'd love to know how. 42 of you, that's 34%, yes sometimes. 64, 52 hardly ever, and then 9% of you not at all. So yeah, so if you've got your top tips, share them in the chat about what it is that you're doing that enables that feedback to come through.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, in the briefing, there are some ideas from people who are where this is getting better. You know, that's encouraging, but it's not nearly good enough, is it? So thanks for that. So moving on then to the next sort of cluster of core messages in the briefing. And for me, this part of the briefing and the core messages in it is so important. And it's underlined very recently in the CQC State of Care report, which talks about the care given to people, for example, with a learning disability or autism being unacceptable. These two messages in the briefing take us into broader responsibilities within safeguarding. And the first is about the regular presence that advocates have in closed environments like wards, care homes, treatment units. How important is that in the midst of COVID-19? The importance of this in prevention of, as well as in identification of abuse and neglect, can't be overstated. The need for this contribution of advocacy in these environments to be further supported and enabled, including through commissioning that recognises and funds this kind of activity. it just can't be overstated. It's such an important role. And then the next message, the importance of advocacy providers in those settings, identifying patterns and themes of safeguarding issues and concerns, having good systems to record and collate those patterns, and then raising the issues with, for example, health and social care teams, commissioners, contract managers, the regulator, safeguarding boards, and being heard. So what we heard was that there's a huge variation in how advocacy projects actually collate and record that information, but also there's a difficulty in getting the concerns heard. Okay, so let's go to the next slide about advocates and what they said on those really important themes. So you can see here, and I'll refer to a couple of them, a preference to deal with issues in-house, minimize and block referral to safeguarding teams. This is a real challenge and needs exploring. Then the one setting we find challenging is mental health wards, where you have told a ward manager who says, "We're on it, you don't need to do anything else." There is good practice, but there are huge obstacles to overcome, and this needs addressing at all levels by all partners. So let's have a look at what might help in addressing those issues. So, as I said, issues and patterns of concerns need to be clearly identified, shared, and acted upon within robust systems. This is everyone's responsibility. It's an area where we need to prevail upon safeguarding adults boards, for example, to really hear everybody. There's a kind of phrase out there which I really like around safeguarding adults boards, which is about parity of esteem. Every single person on that board is held in the same level of esteem, so that the things that everybody contributes are of equal importance, really important. So also what this requires is robust recording of issues so that patterns can be spotted and acted upon. There are some good methodologies around in advocacy providers, so please share those, talk to each other about how you can develop that. Safeguarding boards can be encouraged to hear and act on what advocacy providers and commissioners can tell them. Now, commissioners, and we'll come to this again shortly, have a lot of information from you. What are they doing with it? Are they spotting these broader issues that really need to be raised? And are they a part of safeguarding adults boards? So boards need to tap into that mine of information. And there's lots of questions about how advocacy is represented on boards and how that parity of esteem can be enhanced. Commissioning non-statutory advocacy, this could be community, general, issue-based advocacy and so on, is hugely important. And it's really absolutely vital that that's seen as important work and funded as such. And let's hope that things like the SAR review and the state of care report from CQC can actually put some strength behind that need and that request to commission this kind of advocacy. So over to Gail again for another couple of polls.
Yeah, so it's 2 in a row this time. So yeah, this question, and those of you who've been in the earlier sessions today, we were very much talking about advocacy in closed culture environments. So this time we want to hear from you about the extent to which I can't even see it. So if you pick up an issue that concerns you within those closed environments, like a mental health setting or within a care home, do you know within your organisations where to record that issue and where to raise those issues to? Waiting on the Kate countdown.
I'll close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
That's really great to see. So that's 73%, 96 of people here had said, yes, they definitely know what they need to do with those issues in terms of recording them and raising them. Okay, Kate, can we have the next one?
Certainly.
So you've recorded it, you've raised it. Is it your experience that the issues that you've then raised are heard and acted upon? So the poll is open. Oh, the suspense is killing me. Oh, somebody's asked, by who, in or outside? Outside the organisation. Yeah.
Which one did you say, inside or outside?
Outside.
Okay, I will close this snapshot. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay. Interesting. So there's some chat going on in the box, and I completely agree. The question's not really very nuanced enough. Possible situations and circumstances, but it was about a snapshot here. But great that the majority are finding that issues are being responded to once they're raised, but there is still that variation there, with some of you saying not very often or not at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also that actually it might be that the individual situation is heard and acted upon, but are the patterns and themes heard and acted upon at a higher level or a broader level? I guess that's another question, isn't it? So yeah, it's not a very nuanced question, but it gives us an impression anyway.
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
Moving on.
Shall we move on? So those advocates we had conversations with saw governance as really crucial to developing the role of advocacy in effective safeguarding. And the messages here are about reporting and assurance on safeguarding, which is an integral part of the governance across and within every organisation. Advocacy's contribution to this information and assurance requires a focus and a response from organisers, and I guess that's partly again around that parity of esteem. It's partly again about boards being clear about membership and the rights and responsibilities of each member of a board. Another point, another core message was that it's important that advocacy providers, in partnership with commissioners, develop consistent and robust outcomes recording and reporting. so that actually supports understanding of the impact of advocacy for individuals and for health and social care and the wider community, and can be reported into multi-agency governance structures. So it's about making sure that stuff is recorded properly, that it gets to the right people, the messages that you want to convey. But then about the importance of providers and commissioners of advocacy developing robust outcome recording and reporting, and contribute very well, but then you need to be listened to. Then there was some about the boards and how that can be used